Charles Thompson was a man of immense wealth and refined taste, a self-made millionaire who had built his empire in the bustling heart of New York City. Yet despite his success in the boardrooms and glittering galas, Charles felt a deep void in his life. For years, he had searched for an heir, someone to continue his legacy. His previous attempts at conventional family life had ended in heartbreak and disillusionment, leaving him with the cold certainty that money alone could not forge the emotional bonds he so desperately craved. With 2 failed marriages behind him, Charles concluded that traditional love was nothing more than a treacherous illusion. Instead, he began to see a child not as the fruit of romance, but as a calculated investment, a legacy devoid of emotional entanglements. One chilly autumn evening, while driving through a less fashionable district of the city, Charles's eyes were drawn to an unexpected sight. On a cold, dimly lit street corner, a young woman sat on the pavement. Her clothes were threadbare, her posture weary, yet her eyes, bright and blue, spoke of a depth that belied her circumstances. This woman, Emily Jenkins, had been surviving on the fringes of society, overlooked by most and resigned to a life of hardship. But to Charles, in that very moment, she embodied more than just poverty. She represented an opportunity. Overcoming his usual reservations and with a mind fueled by calculated desire, Charles pulled over. He parked his sleek black sedan and stepped out, his tailored coat billowing slightly in the brisk wind. With a firm, deliberate stride, he approached Emily, who looked up at him with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. His voice was measured, his tone direct. "Miss, I need to speak with you," he said, extending a hand that seemed to offer both help and command. Emily hesitated, caught between the instinct to flee and the glimmer of hope that perhaps this stranger might offer her a way out of her ceaseless struggle. "What is it you want?" she asked cautiously, her voice echoing the hardship of countless days on the street. Charles explained in a matter-of-fact manner that he sought an heir, someone to bear his child. Yet, he was not interested in the emotional complications of a traditional relationship. Instead, he proposed a contractual arrangement. If Emily would agree to conceive and carry his child, he would provide her with full financial support and ensure her security for life. In return, she would relinquish any claim to the child once born, understanding that her role was limited to that of a surrogate. The idea was shocking in its audacity, and Emily's mind whirled with conflicting emotions. Her life had been defined by hardship and survival. The prospect of a sudden escape into opulence, even at the cost of something as intimate as bearing a child, was both alluring and terrifying. As Charles outlined the details, a legally binding contract, unwavering financial support, and a life of comfort in a luxurious mansion on the outskirts of New York, Emily's thoughts raced. Was it possible that this proposal could be the one chance to reclaim her dignity and escape a life of perpetual destitution? Charles's gaze never wavered as he explained the terms, his words as cold and precise as the autumn wind. "This is not a matter of love, Miss Jenkins," he declared. "It is a transaction, a mutual benefit where you secure your future, and I secure my legacy." The proposal was simple in its rationale, yet the moral and emotional complexities it contained could shatter the resolve of even the strongest soul. Emily's heart pounded as she listened. The stark contrast between Charles's opulent world and her own harsh reality made her consider the deal with an almost desperate pragmatism. In that moment, standing in the dim glow of a streetlight, she realized that life sometimes forces impossible choices upon you. With a final tentative nod, she agreed to consider the proposition, a decision that would set in motion events that neither of them could ever have foreseen. In the following hours, Charles wasted no time. He invited Emily to join him in a quiet, upscale cafe, away from the clamor of the streets. The interior was warm and inviting, with soft jazz playing in the background, a stark contrast to the cold, indifferent world outside. As they sat across from one another at a secluded table, Charles's demeanor was businesslike, his eyes reflecting the steely resolve of a man who had long mastered the art of control. "Emily," Charles began, his tone both commanding and oddly reassuring. "What I am offering is a complete transformation of your life. You will be provided with all the comforts you've ever dreamed of: shelter, nourishment, and a chance to start anew." His words, though polished and persuasive, carried an unmistakable note of finality. "In exchange, I require your cooperation in a single matter. You will bear my child, and after the birth, our agreement will be honored without deviation." Emily listened, absorbing every word while the world around her seemed to pause. The cafe, with its soft lighting and hushed conversations, became a cocoon of momentary reprieve from the bitter reality of her daily existence. As she weighed the gravity of Charles's offer, doubts and fears collided with the hope of a brighter future. Could she really entrust her future and her body to a man she had just met, whose cold logic masked a deeper vulnerability? The conversation deepened as Charles presented a meticulously drafted contract. The document, prepared by his top legal advisors, spelled out every detail: the medical care during the pregnancy, the financial support that would cover every conceivable expense, and the irrevocable waiver of any rights Emily might claim over the child once born. The language was stark and unyielding, much like the man himself, a testament to his need for absolute control over every variable in this calculated experiment. For Emily, reading the contract was like confronting a mirror that reflected her own desperation. The document promised security and a chance to escape the cycle of homelessness and despair, but at an undeniable personal cost. Every clause seemed to strip away a part of her autonomy, leaving behind the chill of a transactional existence. Yet, in her heart, the promise of stability and the possibility of a new beginning was a powerful lure. The prospect of trading the uncertainty of the streets for the certainty of a secure life was too tantalizing to ignore. As the discussion unfolded, Charles's tone softened momentarily when he noticed the hesitation in Emily's eyes. "I understand this isn't an easy decision," he said, his voice less austere and more human. "But I assure you, this arrangement is designed to benefit us both. I have built my life on precision and planning, and I can promise you that every detail will be taken care of." His sincerity, though wrapped in businesslike language, hinted at a man who was not completely devoid of empathy, even if his empathy was confined to the realm of efficiency and control. Emily's internal struggle grew more intense as the minutes ticked by. Outside, the city lights flickered like distant stars, each one a reminder of the life she had always known, a life marked by hardship, uncertainty, and the relentless struggle for survival. Here, in the safe confines of the cafe, she could almost imagine a different future, one where she was no longer invisible, where comfort and stability replaced the relentless cold and hunger. Finally, with a trembling resolve that belied the inner turmoil churning within her, Emily signed the contract. The act was both liberating and tragic, a surrender to fate that promised redemption at the cost of something deeply personal. As her signature dried on the paper, the terms of the agreement were set in stone, binding her to a future that she neither fully understood nor could entirely control. With the contract finalized, Charles arranged for Emily to be escorted to his magnificent mansion, a sprawling estate located in a quiet suburb of New York, where every detail of her new life had been carefully planned. As she was driven away in a sleek black car, Emily's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. The street, the cafe, and the cold contract all faded into the background, replaced by the looming silhouette of a mansion that promised both salvation and sorrow. Emily's arrival at the Thompson estate marked the beginning of a new chapter, a stark departure from the desolation of the streets. The mansion, with its sprawling manicured gardens and imposing facade, was a world apart from everything she had ever known. Every detail had been designed to evoke comfort and stability. The grand entrance, the luxurious interior with crystal chandeliers, and rooms filled with expensive furnishings that whispered of a life previously unimaginable to her. Under the careful supervision of Charles's dedicated assistant, Stephanie Miller, Emily was introduced to the regimen that would govern her days and nights for the duration of her pregnancy. In this new world, time was measured by scheduled meals, medical appointments, and meticulously planned leisure activities. Yet, despite the opulence and order, Emily's heart was heavy. The mansion's beauty and comfort could not mask the emotional emptiness that had settled within her, a void born of loss, fear, and the weight of her own uncertain future. In the weeks that followed, Emily found herself caught in an internal battle. Every day, as she attended her prenatal checkups and received the constant care promised by the contract, she questioned the cost of her newfound security. There were moments, quiet and introspective, when she stared out of floor-to-ceiling windows at the vast, ordered gardens and wondered if she was sacrificing a part of herself that could never be reclaimed. The promise of financial stability and a life free from want came at the price of an irreplaceable emotional intimacy, a bargain that left her feeling both relieved and profoundly isolated. Charles, on the other hand, continued his daily routine with the precision of a master planner. Yet, as the days passed, even his steely demeanor could not entirely mask the subtle changes stirring within him. He was a man who had long prided himself on his ability to control every aspect of his existence, and the contract had been a means to an end, a simple transaction to ensure that his legacy would endure. However, with each passing day, the impending birth of his child, and the unexpected complications that had arisen, began to challenge his carefully constructed worldview. One morning, as Emily sat alone in a sunlit conservatory, she found herself sketching absent-mindedly in a small notebook, a remnant of a talent she had long since abandoned. The act of drawing stirred memories of a past where hope still existed, before the harsh realities of life had forced her into survival mode. It was in these quiet moments that she allowed herself to dream, even if only for a fleeting second, of a life beyond the confines of a contract. Yet, even as she dared to envision something more, the persistent reminder of her agreement with Charles loomed in the back of her mind, a constant shadow that dulled every burst of hope. Charles, meanwhile, would often pass by the conservatory and catch a glimpse of Emily immersed in her sketches. Although he rarely spoke more than the necessary words, a spark of curiosity ignited within him each time he observed her delicate artistry. In those moments, he recognized something he had long forgotten, the soft vulnerability of a human soul yearning for beauty and connection. Yet, he quickly pushed the thought aside, determined to maintain the transactional nature of their arrangement. After all, the contract was clear. There were no emotions allowed, only the fulfillment of a meticulously planned plan. But as the reality of the contract sank deeper into both their hearts, unforeseen developments began to unravel. During one routine prenatal appointment, the doctor delivered surprising news. Emily was expecting twins. The revelation of not one, but two lives growing inside her added layers of complexity to an already fraught situation. For Charles, this was a curveball that threatened to upend his perfectly calculated plan. The idea of fathering twins, a boy and a girl, was as unexpected as it was transformative. Suddenly, the sterile transaction of their agreement took on a profoundly human dimension. The news of the twins brought a mixture of joy and trepidation. While the contract remained unchanged in legal terms, both Emily and Charles found themselves wrestling with emotions they could no longer ignore. The unborn children, innocent and full of potential, began to bridge the gap between the cold calculation of the deal and the deep, unspoken longing for a true family. In the quiet solitude of the mansion's corridors, as Emily lay awake at night contemplating her uncertain future, the soft flutter of life within her became a symbol of hope, a hope that perhaps this arrangement might evolve into something more than a mere contract. As the months passed, the reality of Emily's pregnancy began to shape the rhythm of life within the mansion. Every appointment, every meal, and every carefully scheduled moment served as a constant reminder of the agreement that bound her to Charles Thompson. Yet, in the midst of this rigorously controlled existence, the prospect of motherhood, especially the unexpected responsibility of carrying twins, stirred emotions that neither party had anticipated. Charles remained a figure of relentless precision. His days were consumed by business meetings, legal consultations, and a relentless pursuit of order in every detail of his life. But the news of the twins had subtly chipped away at the rigid barriers he had built around himself. At first, he dismissed his own feelings as nothing more than a fleeting distraction, a minor inconvenience in the grand design of his meticulously orchestrated future. However, each time he visited the hospital for a checkup or caught sight of Emily's gentle smile as she cradled her swollen belly, he felt a quiet shift within himself. In one particularly memorable appointment, while the doctor confirmed that the twins were healthy and growing well, Charles stood silently beside Emily as she listened to the rhythmic beating of two tiny hearts on the ultrasound screen. The sound, so delicate yet full of life, resonated deeply with him. For the first time in his carefully compartmentalized world, Charles found himself overwhelmed by a strange and unbidden tenderness. The transactional nature of the agreement began to blur as he realized that these little lives might become more than just instruments for his legacy. They might, in fact, be the embodiment of a hope for redemption that he had never allowed himself to entertain. Emily, too, experienced a transformation of spirit. Though initially resigned to the terms of the contract, the reality of nurturing two lives inside her slowly awakened a maternal tenderness she had long buried under layers of hardship and survival. The mansion, once an alien environment of luxury and cold formality, began to reveal its softer side. Late at night, when the corridors lay silent and the distant hum of the city provided a gentle lullaby, Emily would sit by a large window and reflect on the possibility of a life beyond the contract. The twins, unformed in her mind yet already cherished, became a beacon of hope, a promise of a future where she might finally reclaim the parts of herself that had been lost in the struggle for survival. Yet, even as these tender emotions blossomed, the spectre of the contract loomed large. The agreement was a constant reminder that their lives were bound by a legal document, one that, if left unchallenged, would dictate the fate of the children and define the parameters of their relationship forever. For Charles, this realization was a source of growing inner conflict. He began to question the wisdom of a plan that could so easily be reduced to a mere transaction. Could true family bonds be forged under such calculated circumstances? And more importantly, was it possible to let go of the need for control and embrace the unpredictable nature of genuine human connection? One evening, as a gentle rain tapped against the mansion's tall windows, Charles found himself alone in his private study. Surrounded by shelves filled with legal volumes and financial reports, he stared at a framed photograph of a young family, a relic from a bygone era of his own life, one filled with hope and warmth before the cold precision of business had taken over. The image stirred memories of emotions he had long suppressed, and in that quiet, rain-soaked moment, he began to contemplate the possibility that the contract might be more than a means to an end. Perhaps it was also a catalyst for change, a challenge to the life he had built, one that forced him to confront the depths of his own humanity. Back in the conservatory, Emily's inner world was equally tumultuous. Though the mansion provided her with every material comfort, the emotional cost of her decision weighed heavily on her heart. She often found herself caught between the desire for stability and the fear of losing the very essence of who she was. The contract, once a lifeline, now felt like a chain that tethered her to a future she had not fully chosen. Yet, as the days turned into weeks and the sound of two hearts echoed softly within her, Emily began to see that the true value of life lay not in the strict confines of agreements, but in the messy, unpredictable beauty of genuine connection. In the midst of this internal upheaval, small moments of tenderness began to emerge between Charles and Emily. A shared glance in a hallway, a gentle word of encouragement, even a fleeting touch, a pat on the hand, or a reassuring squeeze, spoke of an unspoken understanding that transcended the terms of their arrangement. Though both were acutely aware of the legal boundaries that separated them, the growing bond between them hinted at the possibility of a future defined not by contracts, but by something far more profound. The mansion's atmosphere shifted imperceptibly as the pregnancy advanced, and with it, the hearts of its inhabitants began to change. Charles Thompson, who had always prided himself on being in full control of every aspect of his life, found himself increasingly drawn to moments of genuine connection. His visits to Emily's room, once marked by the brisk efficiency of business, now carried an unexpected tenderness. In quiet moments, he would linger by the window where Emily sat sketching, his gaze softening as he watched her capture fleeting images of hope on paper. One crisp morning, as golden sunlight filtered through the glass, Charles joined Emily in the conservatory. The air was filled with the sweet scent of blooming flowers, and for a brief moment, the rigid lines of their contract seemed to blur in the warmth of human presence. "How are you feeling today?" he asked gently, the usual clinical detachment replaced by genuine concern. Emily looked up from her sketchbook, surprised by the kindness in his tone. "A bit overwhelmed," she admitted, her voice carrying both fatigue and quiet resolve. "There are so many things I'm not sure about this whole arrangement, about myself." Charles listened intently, the ticking of a nearby clock punctuating the silence that followed. It was as if, in that moment, the mansion itself had paused to witness a subtle metamorphosis, a transition from mere obligation to the stirrings of real emotion. At the next prenatal checkup, the news of twin development was delivered with measured enthusiasm by the doctor. As Charles and Emily sat side by side in the examination room, the hum of the ultrasound machine filled the space with an otherworldly rhythm. The twin heartbeats, twin pulses of life, seemed to speak directly to their souls. Charles, who had long regarded every detail of his life as meticulously engineered, felt a crack in his fortress of control. The sound was a reminder that life was unpredictable, that even the most carefully laid plans could be transformed by the simple act of creation. For Emily, the experience was both exhilarating and terrifying. The notion of nurturing two lives was overwhelming, yet it awakened a dormant part of her that had once dared to hope for more than mere survival. In quiet moments during long nights in her elegantly appointed room, she would cradle her swollen belly and whisper promises to the twins. A future where they might know love, security, and the chance to be truly cherished. These whispered hopes, though fragile, began to take root in the fertile soil of her heart. As the days grew longer and the seasons began to shift, so too did the dynamic between Charles and Emily. Their interactions, once dictated solely by the terms of a contract, evolved into something richer and more nuanced. Simple gestures, a shared cup of tea in the early morning, a word of encouragement before a difficult appointment, the silent acknowledgement of each other's presence, became the threads that slowly wove the fabric of a new relationship. The mansion, with all its grandeur and rigid order, became the unlikely stage for a transformation that neither had predicted. One evening, as twilight draped the estate in soft purples and blues, Charles found himself alone in the mansion's expansive library. Surrounded by volumes of business reports and legal treatises, he picked up a worn copy of a classic American novel, a relic of his youth. The words on the pages stirred something deep within him, a reminder of a time when life had been filled with dreams rather than calculations. In that quiet moment, as the rain began to patter softly against the tall windows, Charles allowed himself to entertain a thought he had long suppressed. Perhaps it was time to let go of the contract that had governed his existence for so long. Little did he know that just beyond the library door, Emily sat in the dim light of a reading nook, her eyes reflecting both the sorrow of her past and the tentative hope for a future that was beginning to take shape. The twins, still growing quietly inside her, served as silent emissaries of change, symbols of a love that was slowly emerging from the depths of a once transactional arrangement. And as Charles closed the book and stepped out into the corridor, he resolved to re-examine the nature of his commitment, both to the contract and to the unexpected connection that had blossomed between him and Emily. The day of the twins' birth dawned with an intensity that seemed to suspend time itself. The mansion was abuzz with a mixture of excitement and tension, every corridor echoing with whispered hopes and silent prayers. Charles had meticulously prepared for every contingency, ensuring that every detail, from the hospital arrangement to the postnatal care, was in place. Yet, even as the final moments approached, he found himself wrestling with a growing inner turmoil. The contract that had once been his unwavering guide now felt like a chain, binding him to a past he no longer wished to embrace. In the hospital's sterile delivery room, Emily lay on a crisp white bed, surrounded by a team of dedicated medical professionals. Charles stood at her side, his usually impeccable composure shaken by the raw intensity of the moment. As labor began, Emily gritted her teeth against the pain, her eyes fixed on the ceiling as if searching for some divine intervention in the harsh fluorescent light. The room was filled with the rhythmic sounds of medical monitors, punctuated by the reassuring yet urgent voices of the attending staff. Time seemed to stretch interminably as the first cry of life broke through the tension. A small, powerful sound that signaled the arrival of a healthy baby boy. In that instant, as the tiny infant was placed on a sterile table, Charles's hardened exterior began to crumble. The sight of the fragile, wriggling child stirred something deep within him, a tenderness that had long lain dormant beneath layers of control and calculation. Then, moments later, the room was filled with a second cry, a melodious, delicate sound that heralded the birth of a baby girl. The dual arrival of his twins was nothing short of miraculous, and for the first time, Charles felt the weight of his decision in the most profound way imaginable. Emily, exhausted and in pain, yet filled with an indescribable love, cradled her newborns as tears streamed down her face. The intense rush of emotions, joy, relief, sorrow, and a deep maternal love, converged into one overwhelming moment of raw humanity. In the sterile brightness of the delivery room, the contractual terms that had governed her life for so long faded into insignificance. The tiny lives in her arms were not mere objects of a business deal. They were the embodiment of hope, vulnerability, and a future that could be reimagined. For Charles, standing silently by her side, the sight of his children broke through the icy barriers he had built around himself. In that instant, the transactional nature of their agreement, once so clearly defined, became irrelevant. The sound of the twins' cries resonated like a declaration of life itself, shattering the confines of logic and calculation. Overwhelmed by the moment, Charles stepped forward and, in a gesture that defied all that the contract had represented, he tore the document to shreds. The pieces fluttered to the floor like fragments of a past life, a symbolic release of the control he had so long clung to. In the days that followed, as the reality of parenthood began to set in, Charles and Emily found themselves navigating a delicate balance between responsibility and burgeoning emotion. The hospital room, once a sterile environment defined by protocols and procedures, had transformed into a space of shared vulnerability. Charles's demeanor softened as he cradled the baby boy and gazed at the delicate features of the newborn girl, while Emily, though still burdened by the emotional scars of her past, embraced the overwhelming love that surged through her at the sight of her children. Amid the flurry of medical checkups, quiet moments of reflection, and tentative reassurances from the nursing staff, a new understanding began to emerge. The contract, the very symbol of their transactional beginning, had been irrevocably broken. In its place, a fragile yet undeniably genuine bond was forming, a bond that promised not only the continuation of a legacy, but the birth of a family defined by love, care, and the unyielding desire to protect the miracle of life. As the twins were gently swaddled and prepared to be taken back to the mansion, both Charles and Emily silently acknowledged that nothing would ever be the same again. Back at the Thompson mansion, the atmosphere was charged with a palpable sense of renewal and fragile hope. The events of the past few days had shaken the very foundations of the carefully constructed lives that Charles and Emily had once led. Now, as the mansion's grand halls echoed with the soft coos of the newborn twins, a new reality was emerging, one defined not by legal contracts and cold transactions, but by the tender, unpredictable nature of love and family. Charles, once the epitome of calculated control, now found himself immersed in the chaotic beauty of fatherhood. His days, which had previously been devoted entirely to business and strategy, were now filled with moments of genuine wonder. He spent long hours in the nursery, learning to change diapers, feed the twins, and even attempting to lull them to sleep with a gentle, if not entirely melodic hum. Every smile from the little boy, every soft coo from the baby girl, chipped away at the rigid barriers that had kept him emotionally distant for so long. Emily, too, began to embrace the role of a mother in a way she had never dared to dream. Though the scars of her past were still visible in the quiet moments of introspection, the overwhelming love for her children and the slowly growing connection with Charles imbued her with a strength she had long thought lost. In the midst of sleepless nights and endless rounds of feeding and soothing, she discovered a resilience that transcended the hardship of her earlier life. The mansion, once an alien realm of luxury and cold formality, had become a sanctuary where every corner held the promise of a new beginning. In a quiet ceremony held in the lush gardens of the estate, a small, intimate gathering with Stephanie and a few close staff members, the couple formally acknowledged the transformation that had taken place in their lives. There, beneath a canopy of softly swaying trees and bathed in the gentle glow of the afternoon sun, Charles and Emily exchanged heartfelt vows. Charles pledged to be a devoted father and a partner who would forever honor the bond that had grown between them. Emily, with tears glistening in her eyes, vowed to nurture the family they were building together, not just through the practicalities of care, but by embracing the warmth and vulnerability that came with true love. As the ceremony concluded, the mansion's staff and the small circle of loved ones looked on, witnessing the birth of a family not defined by a contract, but by the shared journey of healing and hope. In the months that followed, the Thompson estate became a home filled with laughter, occasional tears, and the everyday miracles of life. Charles and Emily navigated the complexities of parenthood, learning to balance their past scars with the promise of a future that was as uncertain as it was beautiful. Late one evening, as the twins slept soundly in their cribs and a gentle breeze rustled through the garden, Charles and Emily sat together on a sprawling veranda overlooking the city lights. In the quiet intimacy of that moment, Charles reached out and took Emily's hand, his voice soft and sincere. "I never imagined that a single decision could change everything," he murmured. "But I'm grateful every day for the second chance we've been given, for the family we've built and the love we've found." Emily smiled, her eyes reflecting the myriad emotions that had carried them through their turbulent journey. "I was scared, Charles," she confessed, "of losing myself, of being nothing more than a means to an end. But you've shown me that sometimes love can grow, even in the unlikeliest of places." Their words, simple and honest, resonated in the still night, sealing a promise that went far beyond legal documents or calculated plans. As dawn broke over the horizon and the first light of a new day bathed the mansion in warmth, Charles and Emily looked toward the future with cautious optimism. They understood that challenges still lay ahead, moments of doubt, of unexpected hardship, but they also knew that together they possessed a strength that was born of genuine connection. The contract that had once defined their lives was nothing more than a distant memory, replaced by a shared commitment to love, to growth, and to the unpredictable beauty of life. In that final gentle embrace of a new beginning, the Thompson mansion stood as a testament to the power of change. It was a home not built on contracts or transactions, but on the unbreakable bonds of family and the enduring hope that, even in the face of uncertainty, love would always find a way.
If you like this stories, subscribe my channel,